The two books that I chose to analyze for this quarter's 20% project was Into Thin Air and Outliers. They are both nonfiction books written by two completely different authors, which have two completely different styles of writing. I'll conduct an in-depth analysis and try to extract any examples that are hidden in the complex rhetoric of the two books. Into Thin Air is John Krakauer's personal account of the Mount Everest disaster on May 10, 1996. Krakauer is a former mountaineer and was at the time a journalist for Outside magazine. Despite being written from a limited first-person point of view, Krakauer tries to describe the experience objectively and to present the purpose of the story through the use of intense language, beautiful imagery, and powerful sentence structure to accurately and respectfully share the traumatic event that unfolded at the top of Mount Everest. Out of the 5 teammates that Krakauer ascended the mountain with, 4 of them were tragically killed by a rogue storm that shadowed the expedition from the beginning. Shortly after Krakauer returned home, he started experiencing what is called survivor's guilt, that quickly put him into a depression, which prevented him from completing the magazine article. This was made worse because the friends and family of the teammates that died started blaming Krakauer and started putting an exorbitant amount of weight on his shoulders. A few authors and editors that Krakauer respected attempted to console him and gave him advice to wait a few years to ease the amount of emotions that was surging through his body. Into Thin Air exhibits an emotional tone that plays a big role in the story. It takes the reader on an emotional roller coaster that loops and turns and drops at any sudden moment. At one point there's a feeling of success, then there's moments of sincerity where every moment counts. Then there's an everlasting sense of suspense that keeps the reader hanging. Krakauer never ceases to keep the reader on the edge of their seat while reading. The introductory chapter of the book immediately places the reader at the apex of the world, the summit of Mount Everest, where Krakauer and his teammates are just at the beginning of their descent. The suspenseful tone is portrayed at this very moment, is indicated through the lines on page 11. None of them ever imagined that a horrible idea was drawing nigh. Nobody suspected that by the end of the long day, every minute would matter. This is at the point of the roller coaster where the cart is just about to exceed the crest of the hill and be sent downward at a frightening speed. Once the chapter ends, the book proceeds to explain the context of the events that led up to the scene stated in the previous chapter. So all the built-up tension that has been created has now been suppressed. All the way to chapter 11, Krakauer takes advantage of the suspenseful properties of the dramatic irony instigated in the first chapter. The reader knows the events that happen in the future, but now has to deal with reliving the events and decisions that led up to the tragic experience that Krakauer had once had to go through. I think it's pretty unlikely that we'll get through the season without something bad happening up high. The irony in this quote just makes the tone even more melodramatic, because we know as the readers, this is 110% not true in the slightest. Chapter 11 is when the first death occurs, where Chen Yunan, a 36-year-old steel worker from Taipei, lost his footing and was tumbling down the mountain, landed headfirst, lost consciousness. Page 194. Later, he told me that he recognized these innocent-looking puffs of water vapor to be the crowns of robust thunderheads immediately after reaching the top. This is the start of the downhill spiral that was foreshadowed from the beginning. The tone created here shares a sense of helplessness and sadness to complement the disaster that is unfolding on the summit of the tallest mountain in the world. As seen on page 276, the magnitude of this calamity was so far beyond I had ever imagined that my brain simply shorted out and went dark. At this part of the book, Krakauer has basically become detached from all emotion, such a short amount of time that he pretty much became numb to sadness. Once he arrived at base camp, however, a surge of gratitude overcame Krakauer. The following sentence is put here to appeal to the reader's emotions and feel the same feelings he felt in the end. Safe now, crushing the strain of the preceding days lifted from my shoulders. I cried for my lost companions, I cried because I was grateful to be alive. I cried because I felt terrible for having survived while others had died. Krakauer is undoubtedly a journalist purely based on his scholarly word choice. He is able to manipulate the connotation of many words to express an overall sense of helplessness and danger. Krakauer uses words like devastating, irrational, and terrestrial to tell the reader that yes, climbing Mount Everest is entirely possible. People have done it before, but it is exponentially dangerous and utterly unwise. There were many, many fine reasons not to go, but attempting Mount Everest is an intrinsically irrational act, a triumph of desire over sensibility. He also expresses his ignorance of the matter by saying, "My ability to discern the obvious was exacerbated to some degree, and it's inconceivable to me that I would have neglected to recognize his plight." This mistake caused the loss of many innocent lives, all because of a few small cases of poor intuition and judgment. Krakauer's use of these strong words greatly appealed to the reader's emotions and engrossed them into the heart of the matter. My mind balked and retreated into a weird, almost robotic state of detachment. I felt emotionally anesthetized, yet hyper-aware, as if I had fled into a bunker deep inside my skull and was peering out at the wreckage around me through a narrow, armored slit. As I gazed numbingly at the sky, it seems to have turned a pre-eternally pale shade of blue, bleached of all but the faintest remnant of color. Krakauer never ceases to captivate the reader with his picturesque imagery to emphasize the dangerous reality that Everest brings to all the climbers that stand by it. Your minds and bodies are deteriorating. Brain cells are dying. Our blood was growing dangerously thick and sludge-like. Capillaries in our retinas were spontaneously hemorrhaging. Even at rest, our hearts beat at a furious rate. This quote on page 161 thoroughly describes the literal threat that residing at such an elevation brings to the human body. In fact, after the first death in chapter 11, Krakauer became completely detached from the thought of death. This is seen by the oddly calm imagery on chapter 12, page 173. The night had a cold, phantasmal beauty that intensified as we climbed. More stars than I've ever seen smeared the frozen sky. A gibbous moon rose above the shoulder of 27,820-foot Makalu, washing the slope between my boots in ghostly light, obviating the need for a headlamp. The unusual aura that this scene brings is not what the reader would expect considering that someone just died not that long ago. Conquering Mount Everest is portrayed as an exceedingly demanding goal to achieve, but in order to make the trek even remotely possible, the climbers must aim for making it to the next camp rather than going for the summit preemptively. Each camp symbolizes some sort of checkpoint, safe haven rather, despite the conditions that the expedition must reach before proceeding on. Take Camp 4 for example. It is a small cluster of feeble tents that has none of the conveniences that base camp held, yet it is an extremely crucial destination that the climber sought out for. It is stated that even the toughest and experienced will not be able to withstand the rigors of the mountain without the refuge of camp. Krakauer's diverse syntax adds depth to the tone and overall message that he's trying to teach his audience. Throughout the book, Krakauer utilizes interruptions to include additional information that is taken from his perspective. Take this sentence from page 153. Over the previous month, Rob had lectured us repeatedly about the importance of having a predetermined turnaround time on a summit day. In our case, it would probably be 1 o'clock p.m. or 2 o'clock at the very latest, and abiding by it no matter how close we were to the top. In this case, the interruption was initiated by dashes, which allowed Krakauer to add his perspective into the scene. Krakauer also uses loose sentences to implement descriptive details to vividly illustrate a scene into the reader's mind. On page 262, chapter 19, Krakauer was describing the death of one of their Sherpa guides. A volley of grapefruit-sized stones came whizzing down from the upper mountain, and one of them struck a Sherpa in the head. The force of the blow chipped a divot as large as a silver dollar from the Sherpa's skull, knocked him unconscious, and sent him into cardiopulmonary arrest. This part of the chapter is the epitome of dark. At no point prior to this section did Crocker portray such a state of dismay. The barrage of discomforting details thoroughly states each step that led to the Sherpa's unfortunate undoing was overkill to say the least. Outlier, noun. Something that is situated away from or classed differently from a main or related body. Malcolm Gladwell, the author, alludes to the definition of the word outlier numerous times throughout the book and strongly utilizes exemplification when trying to back up the points he's made. Gladwell investigates the story of what made many successful figures, well, successful, and delves into the components that success is comprised of. These components would be opportunity, experience, luck, cultural legacy. Gladwell does an excellent job to appeal to the reader's sense of reason and logic by using compelling diction, complex sentence structures, and elegant imagery to successfully keep a professional yet conversational tone all throughout the length of the book. Gladwell portrays a very casual tone that is kept formal throughout the book. In fact, Outliers is very reminiscent of a 300-page research paper that overlooks the various factors associated with becoming successful. Gladwell speaks to the reader like it is a conversation or even a seminar. He tends to break the fourth wall and speak directly to the reader, sometimes asking them questions and even explaining what the previous section was just about. This is a book about outliers, about men and women who do things that are out of the ordinary. Over the course of the chapters ahead, I am going to introduce you to one kind of outlier after another. Outliers contain simpler words in comparison to Into Thin Air. To compensate for this, Gladwell bestowed the reader various abstract concepts that properly represented the idea of success. Gladwell meticulously selected words to appeal to the reader's sense of logic and reasoning. Take this phrase from chapter 2, page 55. But what truly distinguishes their histories is not their extraordinary talent, but their extraordinary opportunities. If this phrase expresses Gladwell's confidence in his claim, he isn't suggesting that this is the key to success. He is telling the reader that this is the key to success. Notice how he says is and not might be when stating his claim. Outliers also expresses a feeling of optimism, which in turn utilizes euphemism to give a sense of motivation into the book. This became very apparent once chapter 5 comes around. First, he refers to the successful lawyer, Joe Flom. Gladwell describes the complicated process that is behind a seemingly miraculous rags to riches story. He was short and slightly hunched. His head is large, framed by long, prominent ears. Flom was extremely overweight. He was a poor child of garment workers. That he was a Jewish at the time when Jews were heavily discriminated against. That he grew up in the Depression. Gladwell took these apparent disadvantages and converted them into advantages that led to Joe Flom becoming successful. But the true story of Joe Flom's life turns out to be much more intriguing than the mythological version because of all the things in his life. Most of the imagery that Outlier contains comes from in the form of exemplification due to the premise of the book not being on Gladwell's story of success, but the dissection of the success story of many others. The book begins with a vivid physical depiction of the beautiful town of Roseto and the story behind it. Roseto Valvortor lies 100 miles southeast of Rome in the Apennine foothills of the Italian province of Foggia. Gladwell uses metaphors to help the reader gain an understanding from a different perspective. The tallest oak in the forest is the tallest not just because it grew from the hardiest acorn. It is the tallest also because no other trees blocked its sunlight. The soil around it was deep and rich. No rabbit chewed through its bark as a sapling, and no lumberjack cut it down before it matured. We all know that successful people come from hardy seeds. This quote emphasizes the focus on how the tree grew up and the conditions that allowed the tree to grow as tall as it is today, and not assuming that the tree was naturally better than the other humble acorns that was growing alongside it. Another way Gladwell adds supporting evidence to the points he's made is by adding detailed graphs and other visual representations to include factual evidence to enhance the appeal to the reader's sense of reasoning. Here is the player roster of the 2007 Medicine Hat Tigers. Take a close look and see if you can spot anything strange about it. By breaking the fourth wall here, Gladwell is able to indirectly interact with the reader and appeal to their sense of logic on even grounds. As he goes on to describe the success story of many people, he adds to his work by doing this. Meaningful work, 10,000 hours. Opportunity, cultural legacy. Every single one of these quotes has been recited at least 5 times throughout the book. In fact, Gladwell used the word opportunity a total of 34 times in the entire book. This isn't because Gladwell ran out of ideas and filled the book with bombastic fluff. The repetition of these quotes was indeed intentional. Whenever Gladwell alluded to these quotes, it was always to highlight the importance of them in that particular section. If the opportunity was there to go on, and you were able to take it, then to her the sky was the limit. If a million teenagers had been given the same opportunity, how many more Microsofts would we have today? Every single one of these quotes share a similar idea. Seize the opportunities given to you, and success will soon be in your hands. But then they make a third error on top of that, and then another, and another, and another. And it is a combination of all these errors that led to disaster. Page 184. Aside from constant use of the same words or phrases when uncovering the secrets of success, Gladwell juxtaposes multiple highly successful figures and compares similarities that led to their successful legacies. Let's test the idea of two examples, and for the sake of simplicity, let's make them as familiar as possible. The Beatles, one of the most famous rock bands ever, and Bill Gates, one of the world's richest men. He goes on to summarize the story of success the Beatles had and the story of success for Bill Gates. But the main point he made was that these two inspirational figures devoted countless, scratch that 10,000 plus hours into whatever made them successful and accepted every single opportunity that was laid out in front of them.